Hello and welcome to Watch This Space with Rivada Networks. I'm Brian Carney and my guest on this episode is Frank Czulo with Network Innovations. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Frank is the president of the Advanced Network Division of Network Innovations. And for our viewers who may not be familiar with Network Innovations, can you just give us a few words about what you guys do and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. At our heart, Network Innovations is an integrator in the communications space. Formed in 1988. We've been around for a while, but the Advanced Networks Group is a little bit more involved in the private and secure aspect of our business, which is our critical customer infrastructure. Network Innovations as a whole is about a 60% government-focused organization, but along with that is also critical infrastructures, hydroelectric projects, utilities in general, but essentially anything where data matters and where people are starting to, particularly in this day and age with the cyber threats, it's a much more popular topic than it was before. So that's what the Advanced Networks Group does.
So just so I understand, does that mean you are managing connectivity for, what critical infrastructure? I don't know, say I'm just making it up, right? But a hydroelectric dam, you're helping that project achieve the connectivity it needs, or networking its computer system. Just is that fair to say? I'm trying to explain it to.
So it's I have this phrase, and some people get it, some people don't, but it's the idea that network security versus secure networks. So a lot of people will look at, say, just general cyber security as their network security, making sure that people aren't attacking them or doing what have you. Whereas secure networks is more the purposeful build of the transport for a secure data purpose. So we take different bearers, everything from terrestrial, cellular. Obviously, we have roots in space. We've predominantly started in the space side of things, VSAT networks and point-to-point links. So we have a long history of space. But as the networks are converging and where you have terrestrial meeting space and cellular meeting terrestrial, now I just call it secure networks. So we deal with secure networks as opposed to, like I say, differentiating ourselves from a virus checker or something like that, right? It's right. A transport path for us.
Understood. And that's where Rivada Space Networks and Network Innovations met, as it were, right? Is we are planning to be a provider of secure data paths, in effect, to you and your customers when the outernet is online, and that's where we come together, just so people understand what.
Yeah, 100%. I would actually call it an evolution, and a lot of people, if you follow or you've had these critical data path requirements before, where you simply had a satellite link, point-to-point satellite link, and then that network became bigger, and then you had a larger topography that you had to cover, and then you looked at the advent of LEO, of course, brought out that scenario, and I've been a follower of Rivada from a very early age, because I had always seen the advantage of LEO, but the challenge of LEO was going to be, how could I, as someone who provides secure networks, take advantage of that constellation. So when the whole original concept that Rivada came up of secure private networks in space, it was a natural fit for us to reach out and find out more.
Sure, I can see that, because controlling that data path and the whole data path, right, not just the last mile, becomes a critical offering for your customers, especially the most security conscious customers, because it's a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? And if signal goes up and comes down, and then you don't know where it goes next, or if you guys have to provide additional layers of security. I don't know if exactly how you handle that type of situation, but um, seems to me that there's certainly a simplification there if you can go across space and come down to whatever your endpoint your customer needs without worrying about what happens to it between a gateway and that endpoint, for example.
Yeah, it's really a simplification, and because we do a zero trust overlay on most of our networks. So people will say, well, why do you care where the data flows to, if you can encrypt it, or you can encase it, or put it on a zero trust overlay, why does it matter where the data flows? So a lot of that comes down to having an auditable and an attributable path, right? So
Right.
if you can come up one spot in the world, know the route that it's coming through, have confidence in that route and dropping it down, even though you're still have an encrypted path around it, you have an auditable and attributable and knowledgeable side of it. One of the things that we see happening, and you've seen with the undersea cables being cut and things like that, it's not so much that they're cut. It's also, well, I mean, it's obviously a dramatic effect when they're cut, but it's the impact is that people don't necessarily know that they're even traversing them.
Right.
And if you don't know where your data is, then building for the contingencies of what happens when an event happens it gets multiplied. So our one of our large narrows is that auditable and attributable path. And then if you can put a secure overlay over top of it, that you're really building a really robust network. So a lot of people, when they think, oh, that this is just for spooky government types or something like that who don't want to be
Right.
seen, it's not at all. I mean, a lot of it's there's corporate espionage there, if you stay in the spooky space, but there's also just the idea of business continuity, right?
Right.
Of knowing your data is such a huge part of your business in this day and age that if every one of us were told to throw away our cell phones today, I mean, a lot of work would not get done tomorrow, right?
Absolutely.
And we sometimes take for granted where our data is. I think I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Declan, your CEO, and I loved the line that he used before was, do you know where your data's been? And that's true, right? Having that attributable path is a key to what intrigues me about the internet.
Right. So let me back up a second. You use the term zero trust. It's a term that's come up on this podcast before, but I'm not sure that everybody understands what it means. It's to me, it's a buzzword, but I've heard people define it different ways. What does zero trust mean to you or to network innovations? How are you using that term? And yeah, just explain it to our viewers if you could.
Sure, and that's great that you make the distinction that it's a term. A lot of people do think that it's a thing. It's an architecture, so to speak. So at the very basis of it, zero trust is exactly that. It is a least favored of permission. So the idea, as the concept is, no user in any network gets de facto permissions. They're all assumed to be denied. Um, and therefore you can be very selective as to who gets approved and for what, and it can get right down to the service level. In our case, I like to use this analogy, and my engineers will probably shoot me for using it for the 100th time, but I find that it simplifies things. Imagine yourself walking into a hallway, and there are 1,000 doors down the side of this hallway and one door at the end. Zero trust is the fact the only door that's going to allow you in is the one at the end, right? All these other parts of the network are there, but you only have access to the very specific door that you're going into, and there are no further doors past that. In Network Innovations version of it, we're a little bit more sensitive to that. What we would say is, imagine walking into a hallway that has 1,000 doors in it, but it's pitch black, and the only door you can see is the one that you're allowed into. And people say, why does that make a difference? And I'm like, because there are there are ways for cyber attackers to understand things without ever being at your doorstep. And that is, they can walk down that hallway and they can see that door's made out of steel, this door's made out of wood, that one has a, a outside lock, this one has a keypad lock, and they can learn about your area, your parameter, of where your potential attack is. And I had a customer that I was sitting with, and we were actually sitting in a hotel mezzanine in a lobby, and they said, "Well, how people don't do that." And I'm like, "If you were a bad actor today and you were watching that office building, you just need to sit in this hotel, book inside this hotel for 5 days, and watch when people go into that building, when people leave that building, when people are, the lights turn on and when they don't. And after a week, you'll tell me a lot about what goes on in that building, but you've never once entered the building." So the idea of terrestrial networks have an inherent security issue in the fact that they can be easily observed. Data centers spinning up. I used an example at the satellite conference, which we were just at, where I was on a panel, and I said, you can now buy Earth observation commercially. So you can see whether a data center, temperature increased 3 degrees. You now have AI that can correlate that to 15,000 other things that says, hey, that data center gets really busy when this happens over here. It's operational security. It's an old military term, but it applies that equally to commercial space now.
Yeah, and it's a kind of data leakage, right? I mean, even knowing the number of doors is a kind of data leakage that could, as you said, it could open up opportunities for, the socially engineered attack that gets the key to the door you're looking for. We just had a presentation from one of our internal cybersecurity people to our team, and the thing that really struck me about some of the harrowing stories she told us about, companies getting penetrated was from her past experience, is the social engineering side of it, right? It's we had a guest on here who talked about, forget whether he called it layer 9, right? But the human layer, and that's part of zero trust, right? Is if somebody has, as I understand it, some sort of sysadmin level person has access to everything, no matter how good their passwords are, whatever. If somebody gets inside their walls, then and grabs that highly secure password, then you want to be able to limit the damage without, so you don't have a single point of failure, right? Is that?
Yeah, and that's the concept that a lot of people accepted for a lot of years, which was zoning. The idea that you zone off certain areas and you have certain hierarchies of user permissions and what have you. And to your point, if you can find the person who has the highest hierarchy and access to the most zones, you're a kid in a candy store. Zero trust compartmentalizes that, and for lack of a better term, you can say containerizes it. But I think the other thing that a lot of people, excuse me, don't realize is it also has the ability to obfuscate some of that. So if you can't see the breadcrumbs that are left, then you can't follow them.
Right. That's the dark hallway, right? Or, to bring it back to the outer net for a minute, if that data is traversing a network at just over 1,000 kilometers, and it's up there, it's you have a degree of physical isolation that is not the be all and end all, but it's another layer of
excuse me, sorry,
keeping it out of, no, you're fine, keeping it out of reach of bad actors, right? It's not traveling through peering points that are of uncertain security. And we've heard a lot recently about Salt Typhoon here in the US, and networks and companies that are the creme de la creme, right? These are not fly-by-night networks or dodgy companies that have found themselves compromised or penetrated by foreign actors and found their networks in a compromised position, right? idea of clean networks has taken a bit of a blow in recent months, I think, as the Salt Typhoon stuff has come out.
Yeah, I think there's what's really taken a blow is people's confidence or assumption. I hand it over to big telco A, and well, they must be looking after data security, right? Like they wouldn't be that size if they weren't looking after data security. The reality is, I think it comes down to now that audible and attributable sort of scenario. So there's twofold in what I would call with the new space or the internet aspect of things is one is sure you're 1,000 miles or 1,000 kilometers in the sky. It's not like everybody in there has the capability of seeing where signals are or what have you. But the other side that is really resilience and adaptability. So although we have a huge web terrestrially of capability, there are hubs of that interaction. I mean, we're located in certain hubs and pops. There are plenty of spots that entire buildings that are very famous for the fact that they actually don't house any humans. Um, you know, those are points of concentration and therefore potential points of failure. One of the nice things about the outer net is the idea that it can dynamically change in its routing. So you could literally lose a spacecraft. You could even just the idea of want to avoid something and dynamically route that traffic elsewhere. So it would be like every single point on Earth being connected with every single point. And I may be driving to your house, but I can take a totally different path every single time. And that path may be determined by I want it to be the shortest latency path, period. Or maybe it's a path that I just don't want to play in a certain neighborhood in the sky or over a certain area. And I think those are technology has given us a level of technical possibilities that now actually have to get addressed by the commercial policy, because we're actually not limited by the technology with the outer net now. We're actually limited by how we design our networks, and we're very quickly, it's going to take advantage of the technology that's available to us.
Yeah. So can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that, about the technology not being the limit, but network design? Just, I'm not sure I understand that.
Well,
Or maybe I misheard it.
yeah, so I mean, if you think of it, network design from a data traversing from one point to another has been fairly, uh, I don't want to say stable, but it's been the same for quite a while, right? You have the idea that you have an IP protocol. You want to get from here to there. You may pick criteria that is least cost routing. You may pick the criteria if you want a dedicated line, but it hasn't been very dynamic in nature. You tend to design a network to that type of transport that's there. If
Okay.
you then have a technology that gives you other parameters to pick the way that you route your traffic, maybe least cost routing isn't my number one criteria or priority, right? Latency is. Maybe latency isn't my number one priority. Maybe it's the idea of the size of pipe, because I'm bringing large points of volume from one point to Earth to the other. I guess the basic scenario that I say in network design is when you have more options, then you can actually start, for lack of a better term, QoSing on those options. And some of those options now relate to transport path as opposed to packet routing or packet size.
Right. I get it. So, and one of the things that you mentioned before that I like, I mean, I sometimes refer to the architecture of the outer net as a kind of fishnet, in the sense that you've got these satellites going north to south and south to north in synchronous orbits, and they're interconnected with lasers, but they're moving in tandem, so they create a net or a web that, as you were describing, sort of doesn't have a node the way that, the one of the places my mind was going was a bridge over a big river, right? If you've got that transportation network, but there's only one bridge, between the George Washington Bridge in New York City and the bridge in, I don't know, in Newburgh, I guess, is 50 miles, and there's only one bridge between those two, right? So if you need to get across the Hudson River, you've got to cross one of those three bridges, or you've got to go 50 miles farther north. We'll leave aside the tunnels for now, but it's an analogy. But those become pinch points, right? That's why there's traffic on the George Washington Bridge. That's why there's traffic on what used to be the Tappan Zee Bridge, and I think everyone still calls the Tappan Zee Bridge if they live in New York, because there's only so many of those points you can go through. And Declan has been fond of pointing out there's a relatively small, relatively finite number of subsea cables in the world, and those can become pinch points in a certain scenario. And as we saw last year, a whole bunch of them travel through the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea. And so that itself becomes a networking pinch point. But if you've got this net where every node is essentially equal in a sense, right? Where, as you said, you can go up and over the poles, you can go east to west or west to east. And if you have reasons to want to go west to east versus east to west, or if you want to prioritize avoiding, even if it's in orbit, avoiding over transiting certain jurisdictions or whatever, you can start to do those things. And the network is sort of homogeneous, is not quite the word I'm looking for, right? But there's a sort of a uniformity of it that allows you to start thinking outside the box in terms of how you route traffic and which priorities you choose, and also, as you said, how you deal with outages, right? An entire plane in principle could go down, and you could still get your data across the globe with our design, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it's resiliency, but that the dynamic nature of it is also there. It's not the only the thought of constellation. People can say, oh well, there's intersatellite links that are being proposed and such, but it's also the ability to have that sort of purpose-built and control aspect, where when you start talking about private routing, you're not at the mercy of somebody else to say, hey, this is what we're doing. But yeah, you're very correct in sort of the way I'm looking at it is, I look at it as the path may not necessarily be 100% in say my control, but it can be factored into my design. Whereas other things, it's like, we're not going to tell you the path. It's going to be a black box. You're not going to see it. And that happens a lot. If you look at, say, just standard MPLS networks, MPLS networks, terrestrial, your data's coming in here and it's going out the other. And by its very nature, they get to pick the bearer that it's traveling through. And that's, right. I go back to that same scenario of, you may not have even known that your data was going across that subsea cable until you had the outage. Because
10 p.m. Do you know where your data's been? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the scenario. And at least with the idea of a private route in the sky, you can, and this is not being done terrestrial providers that are that are now building in attributable places. Okay, you want to avoid this territory, you do not want to go through the middle of this country as your data traverses the globe. It makes it so much simpler when you're not dealing with sovereign borders in the space. Now you're going up, you're crossing, and it's space, and you're coming back down. So
yeah, no, it's a question that we get sometimes, and I've been reluctant sometimes to talk about it, but our cybersecurity people say security through obscurity is passé. So I guess I shouldn't be afraid to mention it. But people say, well, what about intercepts? And we say, well, our position is if it's going through space, you know, lawful intercept arguably can only really take place at the endpoints, right? The stuff that's up there is up there. That's a position that I recognize may get tested at some point in the future, but it's not passing through your sovereign territory in our view if it happens to pass through a node that happens to be circling over the globe. And that's not to say we think the outer net is immune from lawful intercept requests, but those generally are not taking place in orbit, and we don't see a mechanism even really for doing that. So
yeah, I'm far from an expert in you know or what defines sovereign airspace, but I'm pretty sure we can guarantee it doesn't hit 1,000 kilometers yet. And we, if that's the case, then we have a lot of other issues because people forget that the globe rotates. So that does your sovereign space above your country include everything that's outside of the atmosphere? But I think that's I honestly don't see that being the challenge on the lawful intercept side of it, because for most countries, if they're worried about lawful intercept or traversing, they either have a ways and means of making sure their data is sovereign, or it's a not so lawful. It's an unlawful intercept. If
right.
If it's an unlawful intercept, then the goal is you always want to reduce your attack surface to as little as possible. And if you look at the idea of how to reduce your attack surface, if we're talking about that, being 1,000 kilometers off the ground is not a bad way to be to reduce your attack surface. It limits your attacker too sophisticated. I do not want to say that there are not potential attacks on any network. That unfortunately is the world that we live in. It's the question of how you mitigate them. I mean, security people will always tell you there is always a risk. It is about mitigating risk. It is not about eliminating it. So this is a great way to mitigate risk.
Absolutely. I think there are no absolutes in cybersecurity, and all we can do, as you said, is mitigate, reduce attack surfaces, and do what we can, and that is definitely part of what we are seeking to achieve with the outer net, and we're really appreciative to be working with you guys at Network Innovations, and that you guys see the value in it, and I hope we can keep having these conversations. And I thank you for coming on, Frank Czulo from Network Innovations. Appreciate your time, and yeah, hope we'll see you again. If there's anything else you want to say, feel free. Otherwise, we'll call it an episode.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for having me. We'll have to have another one because we completely skipped over the fact that the performance is better too. We dealt with the security issue, but then the other side is we should look at the idea that it's going to be a pretty spectacular performing network as well. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd be happy to come back anytime you ask.
Thanks. Performance sounds like a good subject for a part two. Maybe because I had my ear talked off by one of our cybersecurity executives today. It's just security was on my mind as well. But performance is also important and core to the whole outer net thing. So again, thank you, Frank, and thank you, viewers, for watching. And this has been Watch This Space. Stay tuned.